hope you know, she didn't get stuck in traffic between here and the Bay Area. Moderating the panel today is Sunne Wright McPeak. Sunne is the president and CEO of the California Emerging Technology Foundation, a critical organization that works on the adoption of broadband technologies across the state of California. Sunne's done a number of remarkable things during a very, very rich career. She was secretary of the California Business, California Business, Transportation, and the housing agency reported to her. In fact, there were 13 departments that reported to her. She has previously been the CEO of the Bay Area Economic Forum. She was an elected member of the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors and the president of the California State Association of Counties. And those are just a few things that Sunne has done in her career. For Cenic, the California Emerging Technology Foundation is an extremely important partner. And one of the reasons why I'd asked Sunne and her colleagues, who I think she'll be introducing, if not, I will, to come, is that we have this interesting dilemma, if you will, in California. The better we get at Cenic at connecting our members in their institutions, in their schools, in their community colleges, in their libraries, the more acute the digital divide is when they go home and have nothing to connect to. And the more that this disadvantages not just students, but families. And this is an arena that we are eager to partner with our colleagues across the state on. Obviously, we focus on the social institutions, but one of the things that I asked our colleagues to think about is, as we get better and better at connecting these communities with our business partners, what can we do to extend this connectivity out to the broader community beyond sort of our members, and how can we work with those of you who are in healthcare or doing community-based work, or in the legislature, or at the California Telehealth Network, to ensure that everybody in California has access to a really robust broadband, because we know all of you wouldn't be here. We know what that means for individuals, for families, and for communities.
I'm texting her. Where are you?
I think we'll just go ahead and get started.
We vote quickly and make Eric go first. What do you think?
Eric, by acclamation. Eric Brown is the CEO of the California Telehealth Network. The California Telehealth Network is the leading telehealth network in the United States. They have done a phenomenal job of reaching out to both rural underserved health facilities and urban underserved health facilities, and in a very short time have connected literally hundreds of those facilities to their network, and oh, by the way, to the Cenic network, because many of those health facilities partner with our academic medical centers. So with that, I will turn it over to Eric.
Well, good morning. Can you hear me? Oh, thank you. All right, that's better. Good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. The California Telehealth Network, as Louis said, is a proud partner with Cenic, and I would tell you, for those of you who don't know the history, that I'm not sure the California Telehealth Network, CTN, would be in existence today if it were not for Cenic. We host our network gear in Cenic facility. When I was hired to bring the network up almost 6 years ago, they neglected to tell me that we didn't have our Cenic connectivity in place at the time. And we had over 70 sites that were signed on to receive FCC-funded connectivity. But there was no network design. Jim Delganis was gracious enough to help us get that addressed. And 6 years later, here we are with almost 300 hospitals and clinics in rural and medically underserved communities around California. I can tell you we're a little different than many of my colleagues who run statewide telehealth networks in other states, in that we're actually, in terms of the number of sites we serve, they actually skew more urban than they do rural. In most states, such as Oregon or Arizona, Colorado, Utah, where my western states colleagues reside, you have a major city like Salt Lake or Portland, and then the rest of the state is kind of rural, where the critical access hospitals are located, and they're served by the primary academic medical center in those states. California is a little different in that we have, frankly, multiple academic medical centers, and they have their own relationships in many cases with those in rural communities. And if you look at the footprint of the community health centers in the state of California, they actually skew more urban than they do rural. Of course, we have an issue here in California that we fight constantly with folks in Washington, that their definition of rural and ours is quite different. We have, as all of you know, we have these huge territorial counties, think San Bernardino or Riverside, that have population centers in them. And so we very often have communities that from a federal designation are considered urban. But if I blindfolded you and took you into the clinic and walked you out the front door, you'd know that you were in a rural area. But nonetheless, our role is to expand access to care using technology and broadband to deliver services to underserved communities, whether they are rural or whether they are urban, so that folks can receive access to care that's not available to them. And every day, there are wonderful stories that are taking place around the state where lives are being saved, folks are being seen, they're receiving care simply because the clinics and hospitals that are in their communities are connected. And as Louis mentioned, in many cases, those connections are to the academic medical centers, which is where the healthcare expertise often emanates from in terms of specialty care, research, and the like. I would also tell you that increasingly we're seeing that as more patients have access to insurance in this state through the Affordable Care Act and through expanded Medicaid, or Medi-Cal as we call it, it is putting an even heavier demand on the use of broadband and telemedicine, because as the folks that covered California will tell you, or any of the managed Medi-Cal plan providers will tell you, physician access is one of the leading complaints that they get from patients who now have insurance, but they live in a rural community and they cannot get to see a doctor reasonably within close proximity of where they live. And that's true in urban California. As I tell people, it's a long way from Pacoima or the East Valley to UCLA, especially if you don't have a car and you don't have a job. And if you have a chronic condition that requires a lot of follow-up care, where you have to go back to see the specialist on a monthly basis, what we know is people just won't go, which defeats the purpose of expanding access to care, and is one of the reasons why what we do is so important. We too work with multiple broadband providers. AT&T is here, was our inaugural master vendor, and the vast majority of our sites are AT&T sites. Over the last year and a half, though, we've begun expanding our relationships in other parts of the state, or around the state, with Time Warner and Charter, and most recently Comcast. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'll pass it on to the Honorable Assemblyman Stone.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here. And as you may wonder, what the heck a politician is doing in the middle of such a tech group. The politics of broadband in California, I think, are very, very important. And as we look to what is possible, what we have and what is possible, and realize the communities that we are not reaching. Like you, I am very digitally spoiled. I was first connected to bulletin board services back in the mid-'70s, when we would have to wrap a 300 baud modem in foil in order to get its maximum throughput. And you can imagine how excited I was ultimately to get my first V.32 bis modem, and then onto ADSL and others. So in order to make sure that we are, with the educational capabilities, with the health capabilities, with so many exciting things coming down the line, we can't forget those communities that we're not reaching. And that's what I'm working with the Emerging Technology Fund to try and figure out, is how we make sure that for California, this digital infrastructure is as important to us as our roads infrastructure. If you can imagine, if we had fiber running everywhere, we had roads, that would be a good start, although we also have to be cognizant of where technologies are moving to. And as we're funding at a state level, funding infrastructure, that we're not getting ahead of where technologies go, or that we allow for the changes in technologies to be able to keep up with where we need to deliver the broadband service out to. And I'll give you some examples where you might expect. I get often accused of pushing a lot of money to run very expensive broadband services up to wealthy homes who happen to choose to live high in the mountains in Santa Cruz County, which is where I'm from. But yet we also have a lot of folks who live up in the mountains because they can't afford to live anywhere else. We also have folks in the Pajaro Union School District who are farm worker families, Hispanic families, very underserved communities. And their school districts are trying to figure out how they can get Chromebooks or laptops or other devices to their kids so that they can study for the Common Core exams that are all going to be digitized. And if a child can't go home and use the tools that their teachers are developing them for their best success on their exams, then we're going to exacerbate the opportunity gaps that we already have in the testing systems, because there'll be kids who have not. And one of the school districts in my area that is a more mountainous community, because the broadband stops at a certain point, you literally have half the kids served with broadband, half not. Those who don't then are having to drive into school on the weekends or evenings and sit outside a classroom, pick up Wi-Fi in order to do the work that they would otherwise do if they had had better access at home. We find we have a number of providers who are willing to help get out to some of those communities, and some for whom the business case just really isn't there. And that's what, in the legislature, we're trying to figure out how we can put some more money on the table, resources on the table, design programs to work with the large providers who are here and providing broadband throughout most of the state, and then also be able to work with the smaller providers who will help us bridge those gaps with projects that make sense from a business standpoint, projects that make sense from a technology standpoint, and get the broadband services out to those communities that really need it. Because how do we do telehealth? How do we stitch together our water systems where we can learn and know much more about managing water, managing fire, managing any number of the things that governments typically manage much better when we have data points out there. Those data points then, of course, are driving more and more data itself through the networks that the more far-flung they are, the more useful they are for those kinds of services that typically we find out in the rural areas. In the legislature, too, there's not a lot necessarily of understanding of what all of this means. You only need to come in and see the networks that we operate on in the Capitol to realize that we're not yet even close to the 21st century as far as technology goes. And so a lot of legislators don't seem to understand that, and there's this overwhelming sense that connecting is for academia, it's for the elite, it's for those who have, and we have to bridge that perspective, I think, in a much more solid way in the legislature in order to send that message that this is something that we cannot take for granted, that is an expectation of our modern world. And as we try and push more and more services, Santa Clara County, for example, in signing people up for CalFresh, which is our food stamp implementation here in California, have developed a pretty cool tool, or are working on a cool tool to get people to sign up. Most of the poor, they have found, have a smartphone, a device of one kind or another. So why not build applications? Why not give them that connectivity to connect into the services that we can push out to them? That takes some infrastructure as well. Even in areas that seem to be pretty well covered, seems to be highly urbanized, we still have those divides. If we're building affordable housing, which the legislature right now is really trying to push affordable housing, shouldn't every affordable housing development be wired with the appropriate amount of broadband so that we can serve those customers, those folks who are living in those denser facilities? And again, that maybe can't afford the premium products that are out there, but need just at least a baseline of service, a baseline of broadband. And that baseline is also increasing in what it should mean over time, because 6-in-1 and the asymmetric networks that we have come to expect here on broadband these days are really going to be a thing of the past soon, when we're having to move similar amounts of data over a data link, whether upload and download. So I think for us, we need to figure out what the vision is for California, who we want to be, and we should be leading the world in the services that we provide to everybody in the state of California. Those are some of the initiatives that we're working on in the legislature, trying to put that stake in the ground and bring resources to bear.
I'd just say, by way of an after-the-fact introduction, Assemblymember Stone has been an incredible advocate for broadband accessibility and for engaging his colleagues in the legislature in these issues. And I mean, that's not, understanding a really complex infrastructure is not an easy thing to do. And I have to say, he dove right in at the beginning of his term, and we're really grateful for all the work that he's done. And now I'm going to turn the panel over to the real moderator.
Thank you, Louis. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning, right. And I apologize for both the voice and weather and traffic. And of course, I'm Sunne McPeak with the California Emerging Technology Fund, and I really never have to show up because all of you do such a great job, and I would actually always defer to Louis to be the moderator. I understand Eric and Mark have just spoken because Kim Lewis was really good at catching me at the door and saying, okay, here's what you're to do. That means we're coming this direction. Okay, and yes, you've got a treat here. And as way of introduction, I want to say on behalf of the California Emerging Technology Fund, we are always very pleased and honored to work with Cenic. And when we started this organization, so when I came to it, Jim Delganis was here. We were always welcome. Louis, it's always been a treat to work with you, and Kim has been terrific in supporting all of our forums, and I appreciate that a lot. So with that, we're going to continue this discussion, and I will just say, I know you've heard the expert on telehealth. You've just heard from Assemblymember Stone. To be sure, Mark probably didn't expect to be dragged into the middle of the landmark piece of legislation this year. But that's how things work, and I never expected to be dragged into this whole debate either, but Connie Stewart was there, and long before the California Emerging Technology Fund was directed to be established by the Public Utilities Commission, and that is how we got started, and the PUC said, okay, here's seed capital to go close the digital divide in California. On the Redwood Coast, there were leaders who understood that they absolutely needed to have high-speed internet access, broadband access, in order to just have simple safety, access to basic services, let alone grow the economy. Of course, California State University, Humboldt State sits in Humboldt County, so a member of Cenic, and the president then, 10 years ago, Roland Richmond, was very adamant about how we needed to pay attention. Connie Stewart is now at the California Center for Rural Policy at Humboldt State and is a resource for all of California, not just the Redwood Coast, but the California Center for Rural Policy in Humboldt State is also the fiscal agent for the regional consortium on broadband for the Redwood Coast. And so she's also a former mayor of Arcata, has been an alternate on the Coastal Commission, I think, serving with Mark, and also has served as staff in the legislature. All of that is to say she's pretty much a master of all of this stuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, Connie Stewart.
I always feel like I should just pay Sunny to do my resume whenever I should be writing these things down. And it's always such a pleasure to actually get to sit next to Assemblymember Stone because I was his alternate, so that meant I never saw him when I was serving on the Coastal Commission. I just want to say it's really an honor to be back at Cenic. I was a Innovation Network Award winner a couple of years ago and was so deeply honored and touched by being recognized by you all, so thank you. As Sunny said, I work at the California Center for Rural Policy at Humboldt State University. The Rural Policy Center was created in 2005. It serves under the Office of the President. I'm also the lobbyist for the Humboldt State University, which you can imagine doesn't really have very many things to lobby about, as being a small rural campus. I work under the Office of the President, and my job is to make sure that the community is getting its research needs taken care of. And has a direct line to the Office of the President about its needs, particularly around health research, evaluation, and so what in the world am I doing in infrastructure? Well, of course, major part of health is telehealth, and a major part of telehealth is infrastructure. And so that's how I end up in the world of infrastructure. I really started, though, worrying about infrastructure back when I was on the city council. You know, between water, sewer, and recycling, it seemed like nothing else was really important in government. And the most expensive part of any network is the actual digging the trenches. And so it's become important to me to get as much out of that dig, of that trench, as possible. And Cenic really, I mean, 20 years, you guys were leading the way, but just to get a sense of the room, how many people are here live in a rural community? Yeah, there's a bunch of you. How many people here can do the work they do at home or have to go into the office in order to use the technology that they use in the day? Can you all do it at home? Pretty much. Then you don't really live in a rural community, okay? That's what that tells me. And to Eric's point, that's what we talk about, the definition of rural. So I start with some basic principles whenever I touch anything. And the first principle is communication is a fundamental human right. Broadband is no longer a luxury. It's a vital service necessary to fully participate in the nation's democracy, economy, culture, and society. And as a nation, in order to move forward, we have to have broadband, we have to have the ability to communicate, and rural voices matter. right? So what I have to say to the world is as important as what the world says to me. So in my ideal world, I'd have symmetrical service in a home. There's no one size fits all to providing service in rural. We've got schools in rural, we've got libraries in rural, we've got hospitals in rural. Now maybe my house doesn't need the same technology as the Humboldt State University needs or the library needs or something. But if that pipe is not sized correctly when it comes into my town, then I have to redig the trench every single time the pipe needs to be upgraded. So what I am trying to do in my life, and so happy to know Assemblymember Stone, is trying to get that initial pipe in bigger into communities. I said local voice matters, and then my last principle is that tribal lands cannot be left out. I have the honor of working in one of the most tribal-rich areas of the state. There are 9 tribes in my region, and actually there's 11 tribes in my region, and I have contracts with 9 of them at the Center for Rural Policy. Historically, we've not done a good job of assuring that tribes have basic services. Some of my tribal areas do not have electricity yet. So they're getting broadband and electricity at the same time. And many of our funding programs, like the federal funding programs, do not recognize, because of that definition of rural, do not recognize tribes as being eligible. As a matter of fact, in the FCC programs, about 84 out of the 110 tribes in California do not qualify for funding. So, I really think that Cenic has done such an amazing job, and when you look at this network, it's really incredible. But I am trying to, education is changing, and I need to have the capability of having people are no longer just going to come to a university campus in order to learn. HSU is incredibly rich with oceanography and forestry, but you should be able to be in San Diego and take forestry classes at HSU. In order to do that, I have to have a different kind of network. I have to have the ability to have different technology so that a forestry professor can be in the woods teaching a class to people all over the world. Oceanography, I need to have professors be out on a vessel teaching. All of these things are going to change, but I barely have enough broadband to my campus. As a matter of fact, I'm still on copper because I'm in a temporary or a building that HSU one day is going to rip down, even though they've had it for 50 years. So I'm not even hooked up to the pipeline at HSU. I have people who work for me that cannot even be in my building. They have to go to another physical location on campus in order to run GIS. GIS can't be run out of my building. So I really care about the size of that pipe, and I want that flexibility. And so I'm really working on issues like route diversity. We've had 911 outages. Well, I shouldn't say that because 911 doesn't go out, but the ability for a community to call local 911 has been disrupted in my community. And as a matter of fact, there's a bill that Senator Mike McGuire is carrying right now because you don't have to report when 911 service is interrupted in rural communities because you only have to report if it's interrupted to 700,000 people. Well, in an area the size of Connecticut and Massachusetts, I have 220,000 people in my area. So the whole system could be down in the entire region and there would be no reporting of it. So I'm interested in route diversity, and fortunately AT&T has agreed to provide more route diversity in my area. I'm interested in eliminating policy barriers to rural deployment in state agencies. We have a lot of state parks. They don't want to see towers they don't think people should hike and see towers. Well, that's great, except for communication is a fundamental human right to me. So I've got to get through government land and federal land in order to get services to community. We've got areas where permits are held up for 2.5 years trying to get a tower in. So what we really need is statewide planning on where to put the technology so that we don't have to one at a time beg and hear no. You know, if we were doing this with energy, we would have a plan. We would be able to have a system built. We wouldn't have to beg every single time. And then I really like open access networks, or at least the idea of dig once. And fortunately, Assemblymember Wood, and we have one of his staffers here with us today, Dr. Wood is carrying a bill which I believe is going to turn into a dig once bill. Right now, it's a piece of legislation that asks Caltrans to let us know where there's existing conduit. Cenic has been lucky enough to negotiate dark fiber, but I can tell you, I'm working on deploying fiber in communities where I know there is already dark fiber and I have no access to it. And it's easier for me to dig again, even though it's expensive, than it is to try to figure out where that conduit is, where that fiber already exists or whatever. And so when I finally get that trench dug, I don't want to have to come back and dig again. So open access is really important to me. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Connie. I think I hope you've been giving everybody a round of applause. Okay. Thank you. Turning to our next speaker, Adelina Zendejas is the Deputy Director of the Department of Technology. Adelina is no stranger to state government and has worked in many departments, knows how difficult it is to get through bureaucratic silos, and has actually been extraordinarily persistent in herding the cats of state government to actually come together to provide information to the public for assets that the state may have in terms of building or deploying broadband. And that is really helpful because she also staffs the California Broadband Council. This is an entity that is in statute that brings together various departments in the state government, which you're probably going to review, and also is the forum for these discussions, except it has no money. That was the way in which the legislation got through, and so it's always a matter of how does one just redeploy existing resources. And I work for the state. I know that familiar either law or executive order that says go do all this stuff and no new money, no new staff, just do it. But here is someone who actually does just do it. And I want to say that Adelina is also everywhere you can possibly imagine in California and always shows up for the forums, is always willing to plan. Connie mentioned Assemblymember Jim Wood, who also chairs the Assembly Select Committee on the Digital Divide in Rural California, which is an important forum for us. Assemblymember Wood also carried last year renewal of our regional consortia, of which we have about 15 in California. I mentioned the one in Redwood Coast. Adelina visits all of these. And that's the point I wanted to make, is that you've got a public servant who actually listens to the public and then really rises to the occasion to get things done. So it's always a pleasure to work with Adelina Zendejas as the Deputy Director for Technology in California. Adelina.
Thank you, Sunny, and thank you so much, Louis and Cenic, for inviting me to be part of this distinguished broadband panel, because I think we all are so passionate about this. As you just heard from 3 of the speakers up here, and Sunny, who, believe me, this woman I don't know how she does it. She is tireless. She truly, if there's more hours in a day than 24, she is working them. Don't we all know that? But I know earlier, Louis, you had your board stand up. I'd like the board and Louis to please stand up again, because I'm really excited to mention about an effort. Yes, stand up, please.
All you leaders, stand up. There's more than 2 of you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So we actually have an effort underway.
Thank you.
With
And it's Susan Hildreth is there.
Yeah.
I saw her. Oh my gosh. Okay, good.
underway,
Welcome back.
which is going to enable education organizations throughout California to access our Department of Technology Services portfolio. We're partnering with Cenic, and also we're partnering with the City of Sacramento, and we are really excited that this partnership is moving forward. And actually, our engineers are meeting tomorrow. So Cenic engineers, technology engineers, and other state, anybody else that needs to be participating on this effort to ensure that this partnership is successful. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to provide services. We'll establish a, and of course it's like this, and you have everything in your mind, right? We're going to be establishing a memorandum of understanding, a contract, and it's going to be a lot easier because the process is already in place, and it's going to be a lot quicker so that we can provide these services to these educational communities. So this is a truly big win. I want to personally thank Louis, and Chris Cruz, our Chief Deputy Director over Operations, is here, also wanting to thank you, Louis, and your executive team, because he personally came out and met with us. He personally said, we're going to make this happen because it's important, and this is the right thing to do. And that's what Cenic is all about. That's what this panel is all about. We're all working together to really make this happen. So thank you so much, board members. Thank you so much, Louis. And Kim. One of the things that we have all been saying is, we know how important this is, and the really great thing that is occurring right now at the federal level is that this is getting a lot of focus from the top with President Obama. And recently, they announced the Connect All initiative, which is an initiative to help all Californians so that they can actually access all the tools that they need to be able to get online. And this is moving forward, and the administration has now recommended that the FCC reform a current $1.5 billion per year phone subsidy program, which has been going on for quite a while, and make it now a national broadband subsidy program that is really focused on low-income Americans, which is really where it needs to be. So this is a big win for us. And then the other thing they're really focusing on is also really looking at where do we want to go. We need to really start focusing on moving this effort forward. So by 2020, having connected an additional 20 million Americans to this broadband. So we are moving forward. Things are happening. All the hard work is being heard, and it's really wonderful to see. So we all know that California has always been at the forefront. We are driving broadband improvement, and we are one of the few states that has actually maintained, as Sunny had said earlier, a government body which is promoting broadband deployment and adoption. And that body is the California Broadband Council. And that was actually established under legislation to promote broadband deployment, specifically into what Connie was saying, into specifically what we are all up here saying, into the unserved and underserved areas, because those are really the areas that, it's that last mile that we know we all need to get to. So the council meetings are held several times a year. They're open forums. We utilize a lot of communication in those, and so we definitely have our regional broadband consortia attending. They're providing information, they're gathering information. They're also, we have legislators on the panel, and so, on the council, and so they also are able to provide them with information so that they can look at how to better improve legislation or add legislation, or really looking at exactly what we've been talking about up here as a group. And then last year, the FCC, the council appealed to the FCC to provide more universal service funding to the state, and also to update the eligibility criteria for the Tribal Mobility Fund and the Connect America Fund. Because right now, and these are recent numbers, we still have 1 in 6 Americans nationwide that are still not connected. That is a huge number to be talking about in 2016. This cannot continue. So the council, as I said, is comprised, and as I think Sunny said, of legislators, key department directors, agency secretaries. We have Sunny on the council, and then we have Commissioner Sandoval representing the CPUC. So it really is those critical key leaders in state government and areas that are going to be able to make an impact, that can drive this in the direction that it needs to go. So we are set at that level. Some of the highlights, the important things that the Broadband Council is looking at doing for 2016 is highlighting the importance of a broadband inclusion in strategic planning, because we know the importance of that, as Connie was saying, in the projects with different departments like Caltrans, in the Dig Once. It's so important that they plan those out. And, they look to the years ahead to ensure that we're effectively using funds, that we're looking in the right direction, that we're leveraging all the funds that we can and leveraging the resources. Supporting legislation to garner more broadband infrastructure funding for California Emerging Technology Fund. And connecting key stakeholders to ensure collaborative and inclusive broadband projects. They're also continuing to leverage federal broadband funding to the Connect America Fund, E-Rate, and Lifeline programs. They're promoting communication among state agencies and municipalities for California's involvement in the First Responders Network Authority, which is FirstNet, which is going to be built, operated, and maintained, the first built, operated, and maintained high-speed nationwide wireless broadband network, which is totally dedicated to public safety and really, really needed. The council created a tribal broadband working group. They participated in 4 tribal consultations across the state so that communication can be established with tribal communities. As you can see, the council has done a lot of work. They're very dedicated, committed, and very passionate about the importance of delivering broadband to the state as a whole. From our department, the Department of Technology, I'm over the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy. As Sunny said, I try and get out there as much as I can. Don't always make it to everything, but try. One of the main things that, as I said earlier, is it's really the focus of reaching out to those rural communities. It's really to try and get that last mile, even some of that middle mile, and looking at those projects and figuring out how can we look at resources, not only from our department, but leveraging other departments, municipalities, all those relationships and collaborative efforts to really look at how do we make these projects successful. Last year also, we established the eligibility for federally recognized tribes to use our state data center services offerings and leverage our CalNet 3 telecommunication contract. What that means is that now tribal communities have the opportunity to be able to receive much more affordable broadband rates. And we're hoping that in 2016, we're actually going to be seeing the first tribal communities utilizing those. This is a big win. We continue to reevaluate our partnerships, collaborative efforts, and service offerings so that we can improve costs and services. We know that our state is known for being, the center of the internet economy and the birthplace of countless technological innovations. However, while we continue to make abundant strides to increase digital connectivity, we still have today many Californians that are still not online. So we really need to work together. I think we've got an excellent team here, and it's not just about us, it's also about all of you, because all our voices can be heard, and we as a group can be very powerful. And you have some key leaders here that have already set that brick and mortar and groundwork in the road. So thank you again. I look forward to chatting with some of you later on, and thank you. Thank you, Sunny.
So you've all heard us underscore the importance of Cenic, to pay tribute to the historical role of being the visionary trailblazer. There's incredible expertise in the members of Cenic, in the staff. We have always drawn upon Cenic as a partner, we actually want to, I think, underscore how important that role is today and ask for more. And just to sort of put that into context, we have set goals in California for broadband deployment, and we're now debating also a goal for broadband adoption, that is the use of the technology. In California statute, there is a goal to achieve a 98% deployment. That is that 98% of all households will have high-speed internet access by some terrestrial system or technology. I'm not usually known for being less than 100% person, but we said, okay, there may be 2% of the households that will rely primarily on a satellite connection. But we need to get at least that 98%. And the legislature actually took what was a goal that CETF just set when we began and put it into statute. So today, the PUC assesses that the wireline network reaches about 95.5% of all of the households. With a wireless overlay, that may get us to 97%, some say 97.3%. We're still not where we need to be. And so the point isn't to debate the math, it is really to keep driving in that direction, and Assemblymember Stone's bill is really to get us there. In his bill is also that is called the Internet for All Now Act of 2016, AB 1758, I think is the number. Okay. There is a proposed goal of 90% broadband adoption by 2023. That is 90% of all households would actually be using the technology in the next 6-7 years. That's important. I often found that if we don't know where we're going, any road will get us there. So we better set a goal so we actually do achieve it. Now, having said that, you just heard Alena say 1 in 6. It's actually in California 1 in 5. We still have 20% of our households, 21% as a matter of fact, not online at home. Our adoption goal is that right now our adoption rate is 79%, with 8% of the households having only a smartphone as their connection at home. A smartphone's a marvelous piece of technology. It's just really hard to do one's homework. If you're a student on only the smartphone, it's really hard if you are an adult trying to get workforce skills to have only that device. And so we see that the most disadvantaged are much more likely not to be online. We only have 65% of low-income households, 35% are offline. And the low-income households actually find technology more transforming than people with higher incomes, because it saves time and money, and people who are low income have less time, less money than everybody else. So that's our pitch, and if you don't speak English or you happen to have a disability, the numbers for adoption are even lower. Now, that's backdrop to say the Cenic capacity, expertise, mission has actually continued to sort of become more and more robust, taking on libraries as an example, as part of our extended educational system. We have partnered CETF and Cenic and the Broadband Council to reach out to tribes. Cenic was doing the research and helping convene the tribal consultations, that government-to-government discussion, an amazing resource. Now, as we're looking to have what was an early vision of Cenic, a very robust backbone, middle mile, backhaul, to have the larger pipes, as Connie said, into communities for a variety of purposes, we're looking to tap into the Cenic expertise even more. And so with that, what I want to do, I think we have a little bit more time, right, Louis, is ask the panel members your vision for collaboration and how you can support Cenic, how Cenic can be a party to what you're trying to do. And I want to start with you, Mark, because you are really articulating that policy vision Your bill talks about collaboration for the PUC to actually bring all the parties together in a more purposeful, proactive way. But as you've looked at the challenges we have of meeting the legislature's goal of 98%, you're trying to provide both the policy and the funding resources. How would you encourage everybody here to think about collaboration, and how can you see Cenic being even more of a resource to the legislature?
Let me first put into context that 98%. If you think about well, just put in terms of assembly districts. Each assembly district, there are 80 of them, we represent almost 500,000 people. And there are 2 assembly districts in Northern California. Jim Woods is one of them, Bryant Valley, which is more to the east, that represent probably 1/3 of the land mass of California. If you add up the people in those districts, that's the 2%. Yeah. And if we're not careful on even how we define that 2%, we could be leaving out large, significant areas of California. So if that 2% is interspersed, that's one way to look at it. If that 2% are large blocks of people who don't have access to broadband, we haven't done what we need to do. And I think from Cenic's standpoint, because of your success in California and stitching together really significant educational institutions, for your help to be able to help us understand where we need to go, how we need to go, the state of technology, what's here and where we're missing, would be very helpful. One of the issues I think we have in the legislature is understanding issues as they develop. This is, in this room, I think you all understand what we're talking about. Get outside of this room, you becomes a much more dilute population who understands the importance of it. And for a lot of the underserved community, economically underserved communities, well, even for most Californians, we're used to, probably most of you understand how the technology works. For most folks, for the technology to be useful, they don't need to understand how it works. They need to just have a device and have whatever applications on it work seamlessly without having to understand all of the infrastructure. But that also makes it difficult to do infrastructure from a policy standpoint. Everybody understands roads. Everybody understands water. Everybody understands sewer systems to some point. But when we talk about broadband infrastructure, it's a lot harder to understand. And if it were as ubiquitous as our road system or as our water system, every household has to have an electricity connection, for example. That's just something we take for granted. How do we get broadband to be at that level? And that's what the 98% is supposed to do, with that last 2% effectively being satellite access. But when you look at the adoption rates versus the goal of connected rates, you sort of see where we have a lot more work to do to be bringing people on board. And the Cenic network, the agencies, organizations that you represent, and have a lot, I think, to do with being able to articulate that need, bring more people into understanding how to use and what we're using, what the possibilities are, and then whether it's a household, whether it's a business, whether it's an educational institution, a library, they can then be pushing out more of that information to their constituency and help us ultimately bring up the adoption rate. So again, the more people who are connected, whether they understand that they're connected or how they're connected, that matters less than the fact that we can get to each of those households, to each of those individuals, the information that they need and reach them for whatever products or services the expectation is. So I think for folks in this room, if you know legislators, you are all constituents of somebody, to have those relationships, to be talking to them about what's important in meeting your mission to the breadth of Californians is a very important message to be able to bring to the folks who are making policy ultimately, or that will affect who you can reach or not reach over the next number of years.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, Connie. And then I'm going to go to Eric, and then I'll come back to Adelina.
Great. I want to give an example of how Cenic is going to be critical, and that's our Digital 299 project. When we design a deployment project, well, let me start by saying, when Sunny and I first met, the job we got with our first grant was to look at all of the potential anchors in a community and see what kind of revenue could be generated and whether that was enough revenue for deployment needs for that community. And what we learned was there wasn't enough revenue for deployment, but there was enough revenue for running a system. So one of the issues is, as anchors figure out their own solution, their funding does not contribute to the community solution. So each time an anchor goes off and figures out its own thing, there's less money to provide for the rest of the world. So with the Digital 299 project, what we are doing is, and we came to Cenic, and we were coming to all of the potential people in the region who want access and saying, where do you need to be and what are your goals? And so I say Digital 299, but there's a Spur Up 101 to connect to a research lab. So if we can then get those resources that people need and get them all into a pot where we can use matching funding to double the amount of money that is going into that deployment solution and make sure that the entire pipe is big enough, then we can meet community needs and have enough money for deployment. So Cenic is critical in that project because it's a $72 million project and we need matching funding. And so Cenic can bring its resources as long as we hit its community needs along the way. And so we want to look at partnering more like that in other areas of the state so that we can bring all our funding into one pot, make sure every community needs are being met, not just the needs of one anchor or the other anchor. And Cenic is more and more and more and more going into that direction too, and I really appreciate everything you're doing for that, because otherwise the revenue just doesn't work to get last mile to everyone.
And Mark wants to jump in, and he gets to.
Sorry,
for the abuse
because
he's been taken from me and everybody else, you get to do anything you want.
No. But just apropos of the 299,
Yeah.
The notion of collaboration, the bill that we're working on together, the large incumbent providers are a little skeptical of. They're skeptical of the Advanced Services Fund and how that works together. But I must say, and we're negotiating pretty heavily with them, and when Connie described, we had a pretty good negotiation last week, described the 299 project, they were actually interested in that. They know they're interested in that. And so the other thing that I think can be very helpful, Cenic and how you're placed, is to be helping us with that collaboration, conversation, and the large providers who are used to doing things on their own, but realizing that out in these more rural areas, they need some help too, or they could leverage off of the networks that are being put in to do the business that they want to do. So they're not always talking about collaboration, but it's a benefit to them as well if they're at the table. And I think that's where what Cenic has done and what we're providing together in talking about that collaboration, we can benefit multiple sectors of the industry, even parts of the industry that didn't realize collaboration is helpful to them.
Amen. So Eric, you have another dedicated network. Talk about our collaboration and what's needed.
Well, for the people in this room, I think if you start to think about the direction healthcare is going with regards to how it is being delivered and where that will go in the future, certainly between the Cenic universe and our constituents, there you have a huge impact on adoption, the ability to drive adoption, because if it's not for an educational purpose, and education certainly includes things beyond K through 12 in schools, it's in training and so forth, and healthcare adoption. Remember that within the healthcare industry, all the providers are being required to adopt, as you probably know, electronic health records. That means they also have to attest that they're using those records to exchange information. If you haven't already experienced it yourself, they're all setting up portals, patient portals, because they want you as a patient to be able to go online and check your patient record. You ought to be able to see your own lab work. You ought to be able to access your own patient information. so that you can take more ownership in managing your own condition and holding your healthcare providers accountable. Think about that. That's going to continue to grow. What we cannot have in this state is a situation where either in rural or medically underserved urban areas and where there isn't broadband adoption at home, people can't access those records. That doesn't make sense. That defeats the whole purpose. So the demand for broadband services into the home and into rural communities will continue to grow, not just for educational purposes, but also in terms of healthcare delivery. The big initiative that I want to share or just encourage the Cenic community to continue to collaborate with us on, because you're already doing it. I've spent a lot of time and effort back in DC working with the folks within the FCC and USAC on using the Universal Service Fund more responsibly to serve rural communities, particularly when there are educational and healthcare anchor institutions that are without broadband or without adequate broadband. I will tell you that the 3 of the 5 commissioners for the first time have signed on to say, if you can do that in California, then we're willing to do some things that we have not done before, and they're not known for being flexible back there. So that you can utilize things like E-rate funding, Connect America funds, Healthcare Connect Fund to get this done. The only reason I think that they're listening is because, first of all, I won't shut up about it when I go back there, but secondly, we have a very unique situation here in California. Not all states have a Cenic, an organization with the resources and expertise and track record of a Cenic. Not all states have a California Telehealth Network. And certainly you don't have situations where the 2 organizations actually like each other and work together, right? That is not lost upon the folks within the Beltway. I submit to you that we should take advantage of that and leverage that because we have an opportunity to do some things that in a new way that can leverage these federal resources, bring them to our state in the communities that need them the most. I think organizations such as ours are well positioned to make the argument where the resources are needed the most. It's another big deal because they don't know where the money needs to be spent. We do. And so my call to action is in the year ahead, let's continue to work with the Public Utilities Commission and the anchor institutions to prioritize where should those resources go and how do we break down some of the heretofore barriers that have kept us siloed in terms of how the money gets spent and which providers we use and so forth. I think we can do that.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. And not every state has a California Broadband Council or the regional consortia, or their PUC actually got something out of mergers and CETF to be seed capital, and certainly no state has an Adelina. So how do you see it being brought together?
Well, I think the announcement that I just mentioned earlier is really a step in the right direction, and I think we need to just continue to look at those opportunities, you know, in looking at our staff, talking to Cenic, and I'm sure that tomorrow when our engineers meet, there's going to be other things that are going to be possibilities. You know, I go to meetings and somebody will say, you know, well, I think I may have a dumb question. There is no dumb question because it's out of questions that have been asked before, you know, at the, when we did the tribal consultation that, you know, if we could provide services at state rates through our data center, who would be interested? And everybody raised their hand, all the tribes. And that initiated that initial conversation and got us to where we are today, where we actually can offer that to federally recognized tribes, which California has 109 of them in our state. And so I think tomorrow is going to be the beginning of a great partnership. I think, not that it wasn't always there, Louis, it's been a great partnership, just as you've heard from everybody else. Cenic has really been doing a great job, and now with the focus on the libraries and all of that, it really is opening a lot of other potential opportunities that we can talk about. So I'm really excited. I always try to keep an open mind. I try to think about the state as a whole, other departments. Thank goodness I've worked at some of them. So, you know, how can they possibly help? What are resources available? We're working really closely with USDA Rural Development. We're looking at funding resources that aren't potentially available in some opportunities, but depending on how we're looking at doing projects, they may also be able to provide certain funds. We are really collaborating a lot. I am participating in discussions on the Digital 299 project. I actually was invited last year to go for a week, and so I toured with them. It was amazing. It was very moving to see at first hand what we talk about here, because you don't really realize what the impact is until you're sitting in front of a principal, you know, a legislator, where they're saying, you know, we had, and 2,000, granted, 2,000 children, you know, is not a lot for that population of students. They're not children all, but I just see them as kids. But, but when they're losing 20%, have lost 20% because of the economy in the area, and they can't even give the test, the Common Core exam, because they don't have the sufficient broadband. They have to figure out, how are we going to give it, you know, how are we going to be able to do this over a period of time, and how is it going to be successful, and how is it going to be even to all the kids? Because, you know, if one kid has to have it at a different time, or they're not sitting down at the same, you have other issues. It is very, these principals are so dedicated. I mean, they will do whatever they can, and we here need to do whatever we can to try and support them, because this is California's future. And if we aren't here for them, we're in trouble.
So our plea back, and I'll just sort of underscore it, is really calling upon the resources and the expertise of Cenic to be even more of an integral partner to achieving these goals. We've all mentioned this Digital 299. So let me just say, if you're not familiar with the north part of the state, it is a state highway that runs from Eureka in Humboldt County through Trinity County to Redding in Shasta County. If you've ever tried to drive that is a very windy road. It's granite. It is not easy to get through. California has the most difficult terrain of any state to deploy broadband in. Very interesting. 299 actually then goes from Redding over to Alturas, the county seat of Modoc, and we need a 299 east, by the way. And I can continue to give you state highways where we need to follow in order to have deployment. The point that we're going to make here in Assemblymember Stone's bill, Internet for All Now, is being able to bring all those resources together and keep driving to that goal, to have adequate backbone, backhaul, middle mile in order to meet all the state's needs. I came up with a new one last week, Louis, and I want you to know, I know you're thrilled that we're giving you all this work. And I am going to open up for questions, so just fair warning, I'll take at least two here. It is the California Advanced Services Fund, which is also unique in California. It was established by the legislature and the California Public Utilities Commission to take what had been a fee collected on telephone bills for rural telephony deployment and to convert it to broadband. And actually, in 7 years, a total of $315 million has been collected. It's not very much. Assemblymember Stone, right, $315 million over 7 years is not very much. Assemblymember Stone is proposing to add up to $350 million more over 7 years. Again, pretty modest, but it's been a significant enough subsidy to make a difference in being able to match other dollars to get deployment. If you see anybody, 299 is needed. Don't let the PUC tell you otherwise. Okay, back to now what absolutely we need from you. The Public Utilities Commission doesn't have always the expertise or the staff, the positions filled even that they have authorized. Assemblymember Stone has in his bill some tools to allow the PUC to do some contracting out on a competitive bid basis. They could actually directly come to all the universities and to Cenic and say, we need peer review. Of all these projects, it would be a really important function for all of you experts, all of you geniuses sitting out there in the member organizations of Cenic to come perform that review and get it done in a more timely basis. So I invoked your name and said, here, used to as secretary get thrown all these things, solve it. I would just go to the universities and say, give me your people. We need to have the assignment, and sometimes we could pay a little, sometimes we couldn't always. So that is another opportunity, and one I'm going to follow up on, because we've got to accelerate the use of the dollars that the legislature is actually allowed to be collected into our California Advanced Services Fund. And I see all of you that are shaking your head up and down. You know that is volunteering to serve on a peer review committee. You understand? Okay. Okay, let's take a couple of questions from the audience to all these experts sitting up here. Yes.
This is so impressive, very exciting. I'm Florence Hudson with Internet 2. And when you started talking about the Connect All and Connect Schools and Connect Everybody, are you also involved with the Global Connect program? Because I'm going to be going to, IEEE is hosting a technical meeting the day before Senator, what's his name? Secretary of State Kerry, his meeting on April 14th, and I'd be happy to connect us and stay in contact. Are you already involved in Global Connect?
No, I'm not.
Okay, well, now we're friends.
Sorry, no, I'm not.
And now you're representing us to do that.
Exactly.
Right.
So fun.
Okay.
Excellent.
I know.
And we were going to chat later on, so that works out nice. Thank you.
Best friends. Okay, thanks.
Great.
Hi, Jeff Weekly, Director of Cyber Infrastructure at the University of California, Merced. I will volunteer.
Thank you, Jeff.
I also happen to be from Marina, which is in Assemblyman Stone's district, and served for 2 years on the Economic Development Commission there. And we struggled with a local jurisdiction deployment of open access in a small town that is sort of in between larger areas and isn't really rural, isn't really urban. And I'd like to hear what you think, how we can provide a better level of service, subsidized service, open access, open service to those communities, especially a little town like Marina, which is working class, heavily Latino, and historically sort of the underdog.
Mark?
This is my district, but Connie's the expert on that. And especially for those areas with CSUMB, Cal State University in Monterey Bay there, all of the educational institutions that we have around the Monterey Bay area, why we haven't solved that already is sort of what we're here, is all of those silos. And that's the regional consortia sort of put together trying to figure that out. And when you look at where the access is, the low-hanging fruit is really taken. And that's why getting some of the money and the resources in building these collaborations to make sure we're out to those economically underserved areas who often are, from a broadband standpoint, underserved or unserved. And I quibble all the time with this notion of what's served or underserved, because the amount of speed, the amount of bandwidth that's being put into a lot of these communities really isn't ultimately adequate for for these families to be able to use in any reasonable time, given especially what's available and the kinds of tools we want those families to be able to use, whether it's educational, job search, health, all of these things that we're putting out on the networks. Those communities are the ones who are being left behind. And I do a lot of work with juveniles and with kids, and those are the ones that I see most closely. Those communities are really being left behind. So building those regional consortia, utilizing the educational institutions that are there and being able to pull off of those networks, and getting local jurisdictions to do dig once policies, to be laying conduit and dark fiber where they can. And they need help with the technical as well. Absolutely.
Eric.
I just want to remind everybody that, excuse me, when I go back to Washington and I talk to the staffs and folks on the ranking committees and so forth. We all have a responsibility, I think, all of those of us who are, shall we say, a little more tech savvy, a little more broadband aware, that it is important to engage in advocacy, both as a private citizen and as at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, because we're blessed to have him. He gets it. But the vast majority of them don't. And I've actually witnessed testimony where folks from rural America came in and said, I'm not sure I want broadband in my community. I don't want my kids exposed to the Taliban. I don't want my husband accessing that stuff. All right? So I throw that out there because that is the real world we live in. And as folks who are aware of what the broadband can do, both from an education, healthcare, public benefit standpoint, it is very important that these communities don't get left behind. And I got to tell you that if you think there's this unanimous, ubiquitous advocacy going on, it isn't. We have a national broadband plan, but it hasn't necessarily been funded at the federal level in the same manner that some other things that we do at the federal level. So I feel your pain, because there are a lot of these communities that are they don't fit in the right box, so they don't get the resources they need. But I would share for everybody, it's important to continue to advocate in general that broadband needs to be a priority, because that is not necessarily from a policymaker standpoint something that's universally understood.
And if I could, so Jeff, thank you for volunteering, number one, so I'm not forgetting that. But I also want to tell you, I grew up in Merced County, so 6 miles out of Livingston. I know Merced County. Having UC Merced there is a huge asset for the entire San Joaquin Valley, as well as Merced County. The schools in Merced County are actually doing some innovative things, but I bet they're not connected as much to the university as they need to be. Recently, Merced Union High School, so that's Livingston High and Atwater and Merced, all told me, well, they're doing some interesting things with broadband adoption, with technology, with one-to-one computing. The principal at Livingston High is actually married to, I think, the superintendent from Belico. What I'm really going to tell you is I know that things are going on, but they need to be more connected. Your chancellor, Dorothy, is a wonderful advocate for the community. Please encourage her to talk to just the Merced Council of Governments. They all should have a policy. They don't all have a policy. We are really fortunate that over the last few years we've gotten the League of California Cities, California State Association of Counties, and the Rural Council of Rural Counties, or Regional Council of Rural Representatives, to RCRC. They always change their name. Yeah, representatives.
California's rural counties.
Yes, representatives, California's rural counties. Okay. The 32 or 3 rural counties. I mean, when 35 now that keep joining, every county has parts of it that are rural, and there are parts of even San Francisco really can't probably claim that, the county and city of San Francisco, but there are pockets of low-income neighborhoods in San Francisco that don't have broadband access. So. And I also, when I was secretary of BT&H, went to Dr. Ashley at UC Merced and got engineering review for the Bay Bridge. So that was sort of why I came back to you. So thank you for carrying on that tradition. But if you, just from the UC Merced, could encourage the communities around you, because your chancellor will have great influence on them. And one of the first grants that CETF did was to UC Merced to look at telehealth, telemedicine. Because we want the School of Medical Education at UC Merced to be another hub for the UC system. Okay, so I've now lobbied you sufficiently. Other questions? Yes, sir, back there.
I'm Stephen Roper. I'm the IT director at College of the Redwoods in Eureka.
Great. We can't quite, you've got a halo around you with the lights behind you, so it's hard to see.
That's okay. You don't need to see me. You just need to hear me.
Okay.
We service 4 counties in Northern California. We probably have the largest footprint of any community college in the state. And I notice in your digital 299 that you're missing an opportunity, we believe. We have a educational site in Hoopa, which is just off of...
No, we're going to Hoopa.
Okay, that's good. Your material doesn't quite spell that out.
No.
And I think it actually affects rural health as well, in that the only infrastructure in Hoopa is College of the Redwoods site,
Exactly.
the high school.
Sorry,
The high-
no, we are going to Hoopa. That's
Okay.
what I was talking about with the spurs. We are gonna, there is a spur up 96 as well, spur through Douglas City, and a spur down to Hayfork. We actually met with the tribal council, and they endorsed the project, and so we are taking that fiber up Highway 96 to Hoopa as part of
Currently,
that.
we
Yeah, and we were thinking of College of the Redwoods when we decided to do that as well. So, yeah, no, that's exactly what I was talking about with developing everyone's needs. It's not, actually, you know what? It's only going to, because of the poles up there are really new, it's only about $220,000 to get to Hoopa. That's not that much. But if you had to come from Hoopa to Eureka, that's a lot of money. And so that's exactly what I'm talking about. If we all work together, we can figure out how to do this in a more affordable way.
Yeah, we're paying about $3,500 a month for WAN access.
Right now.
Right now, and that's 3 T1s. That's all that's available.
It's a joke. It's a joke.
However, I am kind of curious from Cenic's perspective, if I can purchase a T1, why can't I get Cenic service to this educational site? Or we had 25 graduates last year, the highest number that Hoopa has ever had. And through us using telepresence, we're increasing the number of courses that are being taught there. We're even offering Academy of Justice to the tribal police now through telepresence.
Exactly.
But I can't get a Cenic circuit put in there, even though I can purchase a T1.
Well, I think that Louis is available to talk to you during coffee.
Yeah.
At least that's the signal that I'm getting from him, and he's confirming that I was reading his body language appropriately. But this is the kind of thinking that we want. Thank you for raising that question. I mean, wherever you're at, you're all an asset. The people, you are an asset. Then you have physical things that you can add to the mix. Be thinking really innovatively like you just did. Okay, we kept a few more minutes.
Come to our broadband forums and join our regional
Yes.
consortia. Yeah.
Yes. Another question or two. Yes, sir.
My name Nathan Vosberg with the Coalinga Huron Library District. And first is a comment. I want to thank you guys for all you guys have done. Cenic has made the beginnings of a reality for places like Huron to get some high-speed internet, places like Coalinga to up their internet.
We're talking about Huron in the San Joaquin Valley.
Yes.
Yes.
And then my question is, what exactly does define broadband? Because here's the issue. We get 1 megabyte upload in most of my town. That's all the people get. And, you know, Cenic reaches, maybe the idea reaches into the homes of the kids after they get out of school, after the libraries close, after those type of things, and they still need to do their work. But when you want to stream video or when you want to do a back and forth with a professor, 1 meg is not enough. And so I'd just like to know, what is your definition so I can take that back home and say, hey, you know, we need to work on this. What is the definition of broadband?
I'm going to comment in terms of policy and then invite the other comments. Or did you not want me to do that?
Symmetrical. No.
Okay, well, I think, well, I'm going to let Assemblymember Stone have even the bigger version. So, literally 8 years ago, when the California Emerging Technology Fund was established, that the PUC directed us to be founded and stood up, the FCC had a definition of broadband that was 256 kilobits in one direction. And if it was in both directions, then it was called Advanced Communication Services, literally. That was it. Now, the FCC has moved way beyond that. when we started commenting on federal policy and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was established, we said the definition should be dynamic. It should not be static, and it should be related to the end customer, and that there's a spectrum of customers from the residential household to anchor institutions, schools, libraries, research institutions, government, to employers, small and large, and to the infrastructure of our grids, of our energy grid, our water systems, all of those things. And that it should always be sufficient, robust, for both resilience and supporting, if you will, the demand for its bandwidth, i.e. speed, to support whatever is the prevalent consumer application at any given point in time. So think in terms of that concept qualitatively. Now, why is that important? It needs to drive public policy. We need to keep looking at what's going to be adequate and absolutely not under-investing in the infrastructure, even to our last mile user. And that's a part of what also has driven Assemblymember Stone to put forward this bill. It's evolved certainly in the conversation, but we're at this moment in time, whether or not you, Cenic, sort of win the philosophical policy debate that you've been at the forefront of for literally a couple of decades. There was, at one point you had gigabit or bust. That was a slogan. It was a way ahead of its time, a visionary. You know, good ideas don't die; they just wait for the right crisis. So don't despair, but hang in there. And with other applications that have certainly evolved, like telehealth, telemedicine, there's a different need for the network. So keep that in mind and do be in the forefront of this debate of Internet for All Now Act that Mark has. And do not let any legislator, no matter where they're at, say they're not going to support it. Because if they're saying they're not supporting this bill, then they're not supporting your mission. They're not supporting where we need to be in California. Okay. Mark, Connie?
Well, I will just say that last year, almost 2 years ago, I put a bill out just to talk about the federal standard of 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up, in a way to see what would happen, and you'd have thought the sky was falling. There's a real disconnect between what the major providers want to provide, because that's part of their, they've got the infrastructure investment, but they also want to put out a basic level of bandwidth and then upsell for the rest of them. But for your interests, for my interests, and as we look across California, we need to have networks that can carry the data as needed and as necessary sort of over time. But unfortunately, we're starting out with really very thin pipes. And I have this argument with a lot of folks all the time about whether 6 and 1, 10, 1.5, any of that is actually adequate. And my frustration is, as long as we're talking about such asymmetrical networks anyway, we're missing the point of what broadband should be, or should be over time. And because there's such a lack of understanding of what this means, of what broadband really is or should be, or what potential should be, it's easy to confuse the issue when we're talking policy. And for most policymakers who come out of urban areas, who have areas that are served, don't think twice, because they don't necessarily know about what their broadband connection is. They just plug in and things seem to work. They're not understanding the implications for when we get out to the more rural areas, and how we design networks, and sort of the vision for what California actually should be. So we shouldn't be talking about, I would completely agree, should not be talking about sort of speeds and bandwidth. The networks need to be providing them, but the existing large providers, the incumbent providers who are out there, they want to have a tighter control over what those bandwidths ultimately are, and they get very nervous if we're talking about spending public money in or around areas where they're already providing lower speeds because they're afraid of a provider coming in and upping the speed at a more economical price, because then you're going to be picking customers off from them. So it's their business model up against should be our obligation to provide truly adequate bandwidth out to everybody else. So you're going to get a very inconsistent definition of what broadband really is. And what Sunne says is it needs to be enough for what the expectation is of the end user at that point, which would be different for a household or for a business or for a medical clinic or for a school, yes. But they should be driven by what that expectation for that end user customer is. And I will never agree that 6 and 1, 10 and 1 are adequate.
Okay, Connie, did you want to comment?
All I wanted to say is, you know, right now, the way things work in my region is that if you want to move into town, you need to know where the pipe is. So if somebody wants to locate, I mean, when George Lucas moved to Marin, you know, there was no infrastructure there for what he was doing. I've got a Hollywood guy who lives down the street from me, and he has to, every Monday morning, drive, you know, to the airport in order to work. His entire company would be located in my community if there was a big enough pipe. So there are all of these economic development opportunities that cannot occur, and I get calls all the time from architects, from other people who decided to go out in the world and build a house or put a house or buy a house in a community, only to discover they can no longer do their job from their home. And so if you, in electricity and all the other worlds, you don't have to think before you decide where to live. I mean, this is really a major restraint to these communities. It's a major restraint to people. That's why I talk about it as a human right, right? If you can't live in my community and have your job, that's a problem. Now, I don't think we need symmetrical to everybody's home, but I think there ought to be an opportunity for you to purchase that service without being told, well, that service costs $10 million. You know, it costs $100,000, they wouldn't even blink. But, you know, that's what people are being told, or you will never have access. So there are architects that can't live in half of California. They just can't, unless they want to get in their car or go to the airport every day. And that's what needs to stop.
And so just going back to Huron, in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley, literally part of the most productive agricultural areas on the planet. California provides food to the world. The agriculture is evolving, and it needs to have literally the broadband technology in order to have the most efficient resource application, to get the highest yields, to be able to have access to markets. We're sitting here at UC Davis, where tech transfer was actually sort of invented by the University of California, understanding as a land-grant university that there needed to be the research from ag actually deployed out to all of California. And we do not have the technology that exists today to optimize agriculture for the rest of the world, and it's one of the pillars of California's economy. So just for that alone. We think about, because being an old farm girl, county fairs a lot. I mean, these are wonderful assets. Some of them can't even be operated. They're also what we use for staging. Firefights, being able to do emergency response. Cal IT2 sitting there in UC San Diego has some of the best information. Unfortunately, there's been too many wildfires in San Diego County. But had that information been available real time into Tuolumne County at the county fair site for the rim fire, we might have had a better shot at using our resources. Being able to connect all the county fair sites, have high-speed broadband as part of the authorization for use of the California Advanced Services Fund in Assemblymember Stone's bill. And each of you interact with the private sector coming to your campuses. You've got relationships. What I think we want to leave you with, and I know we've been a little heavy-handed, or I have, in this message, which is first, understand how much of an asset you are for the rest of California. B, step up and absolutely continue the mission of Cenic. C, don't let anybody tell you we don't need internet for all now. D, continue to be the voice to the industry so that they understand what's at stake for them too. We need them to be profitable, but they also need the resources. And then E, I'm going to leave you with a little story. At the California Emerging Technology Fund, when we realized we had to mobilize social media to communicate with the Federal Communications Commission about several important things, we went out to get our URL and we wanted Internet for All. Only that had been taken, so we got Internet for All Now, because that's what was available. I mean, that's how we all end up sort of with our URLs, right? Well, Internet for All Now spells IFAN. And when I decided I really needed to communicate to regulators in a big forum what we were about, and this was a pretty spiritual movement. I mean, we're all really dedicated to getting internet for all to everybody. We went out and thought, IFAN, that's like a church fan. So we have our internet for all now, church fans, synagogue fans, mosque fans, whatever, or just, mowing the regulators. So I'm going to hand out to all of our panel members, our Internet for All Now and Assemblymember Stone, our fans. Assemblymember Stone very kindly used that name in his bill, and to you, Louis, we want to present you with your very own Internet for All Now fan, and keep the winds of promise moving. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're hereby adjourned.